Morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. During last week's discussion with City Manager John Schneider, I tried to emphasize the point that the key to a successful riverfront development was the radical renovation of Fort Washington Way. Stadiums may be more interesting, but not nearly so important in the long run. This week, we focus on the other key to the success of the riverfront. And no, it's not stadiums either. It's parking. On Tuesday, Downtown Cincinnati Incorporated, DCI, released its vision of parking and development on the riverfront. If you slid over that story discouraged by the thought of one more riverfront twist or couldn't make heads or tails out of the black and white maps in the newspapers, this morning we will explore this all-important topic. I am joined this morning by John Schneider, who has been active with DCI since its founding. John is now on the board of the funding agency that supports DCI. John, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Why has DCI decided it wants to get involved in this particular topic? I mean, on many levels, the city has a planning department, planning commission. Why has DCI come forward regularly over the years with proposals about the riverfront?
Well, remember that DCI first suggested the reconfiguration of Fort Washington Way back in early 1995. As that process evolved, we realized the ability to put the 5,000 parking spaces in the trench and the land immediately south of it. We saw that as a community asset. We have frankly never lost interest in the riverfront since that day. It's Fort Washington Way that finally unlocked the riverfront was the keystone for it.
Originally, the city was just going to repave and sort of do a maintenance job on Fort Washington Way. They weren't going to do the sort of massive overhaul. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I was chairman of DCI's Transportation Committee at that time, and Jim DeWayne, the head of OKI, encouraged me to think that we could come together as both communities on both sides of the river and look at a fairly radical redesign of Fort Washington Way. And now, 5 years from the time we first suggested it, it's going to be finished.
Well, in the parking plan that you released earlier this week, and I want to show an overview right now of that plan for our viewers, what are the essential qualities of that plan?
Well, drawing on some DCI customer research, people value convenience downtown more than anything. The problem with the riverfront parking assets is they're all too far south. They're all centered on Synergy Field, or they're in the surface parking lots that run up against the river. What Fort Washington Way allowed us to do is pull everything further to north, like you put a big magnet and you're just going to pull all the cars up to the edge of the city. And it made possibilities that were frankly never there before. And then when you extend the street grid down through those parking structures, you have the ability to access the riverfront in a very natural way.
So I want to make sure that we get up on camera the red parking spaces, and these are queued upstairs. That's why I'm referring to them by color. But the red parking spaces, you see the revised Fort Washington Way, and then those red structures are in the southern trench of the Fort Washington Way we know when we go east on Fort Washington Way.
Right.
That's what those structures are.
Right. They're excavated. We're going down another level, and we're going to put 3 layers of parking in there.
And how many will that hold? How many?
Actually, in the trench from the Bengals to the Reds, wherever they end up, there are approximately 4,000 spaces in the trench, and then say another 1,000 or so immediately south of the trench, south of Pete Rose Way, if you will.
You know, parking is a pretty mundane thing.
It is.
You know, most people, they pull into a parking lot or a parking garage, they park their car, they don't even think about it. Don't realize how expensive parking is. Mm-hmm. For a structured parking, a parking deck,
yes,
multi-story deck, how much per space does it cost to create one space of parking?
Well, no two spaces are alike. We're using the county's numbers, and for the spaces in the trench, those are about $16,000 per space, and they're so expensive because we have to move the flood wall that has been the subject of many news reports in the past week. That adds probably $4,000 to the cost of the parking space, simply to move that flood wall. And also we're digging down further and putting retaining walls in to support that parking in the trench. For the on-grade, the parking that can be built on grade in a greenfield type site, we're saying it's more, the county's saying it's more like $11,000 a space. For surface parking, you get numbers down around $3,000, and for parking meters, you get down to $425 a space. So there's all different answers to that question.
But we're looking at a lot of parking decks, especially
yes,
in that red area and also in the blue areas that we talked about.
Decks, right.
A lot of parking decks, very expensive,
right.
Very expensive space. You were mentioning that this frees up other space. In your vision, in the DCI vision, what's the best use of space that's freed up by contracting the parking?
Well, in one sense, we don't know yet. You know, the year 2000 plan carried our city up to the year 2000, 2 years from now, and really no farther. Fort Washington Way, and even if it were a more long-range plan, Fort Washington Way changed all the rules of the game. Land that formerly was really usable for not many things other than the sports stadiums suddenly became unlocked and usable for commercial development, for many other things. One thing that we have been stressing is the need to have an open grand civic space in the center of that riverfront, something very, very unusual. And we would like to see that in the form of parkland. If baseball were built east of Main Street, as Michael Schuster and I have proposed, you'd have 40 acres of land there that could become a park like the Chicago lakefront, like Central Park in New York.
So in that overview, for example, you see a tremendous amount of green space,
yes, right,
that is created by doing it this way.
Right. And it would have attractions in it. I mean, there would clearly be restaurants there. It would not be sterile green space, but it should be open.
Let me, up on the screen right now, we have some drawings of the city's conception of what the riverfront would look like. I want to have you react to that. What's your reaction to, and what's not so much yours personally as DCI's reaction?
I think anybody would want something like that. The question is, where are you going to do it? We would pull all of that further north into downtown. Our position is this, and again, I'm not a DCI board member, not speaking for DCI, but that type of development is exactly what you want to do, but you want to start at 4th Street, and you want to build the block in a very sequential, logical way to 3rd Street. And then and only then do you want to leapfrog across Fort Washington Way and continue that development further south. The risk here is if we put 675,000 square feet of mixed-use development in that area, the central riverfront, that you will have a dumbbell-shaped downtown. You will have an activity center there. You'll have another one up around Fountain Square. And until that critical block, most critical block between 4th and 3rd is complete, you'll not have a very good linkage between them. That would be, I think, a disaster, very bad for our city.
In terms of the city's plan, and there is an overlay to the map that you have, and I want to be able to show that on the screen. How is the plan of the city? What's it do, especially to the green space?
Well, it's the space that we show in green between the Roebling Bridge and Race Street. We'd like to have that mostly open. The city's plan, our plan is oriented on an east-west axis. It runs along the edge of downtown in a very logical way. The city's plan is more on a north-south axis. It strikes out a path for the river. Now, that may eventually happen at some time in some configuration. We would rather start north and work our way south one block at a time. And frankly, that's why downtown Cincinnati has survived over the years. We've had a very focused downtown, one block at a time strategy. Most cities don't have the type of downtown that we still have intact today because we've done it the right way.
And I think in context of that, it's good to remember with the Aronoff Center, when the question of siting the Aronoff Center was, the discussion was going on, people pointed out that you couldn't get more than 2 blocks from Fountain Square and have that really be a successful development, because that's, people think about the downtown as a very small place.
When UDA was in town, the city county urban development consultants, they interviewed many people, 100 people. I was sat in one of those interviews. To a person, they found they remarked how remarkable it was that every person they talked to, when asked what is the center of our city, said Fountain Square. They didn't say the riverfront. They didn't say somewhere else. They said Fountain Square. Mm-hmm. That's what the strength we need to build on.
Well, let's talk some numbers.
Okay.
In terms of your plan,
right,
the grand plan, what's it going to cost for you, for DCI's plan, to build out, and I know it's done in phases, but to build out the parking as you show it on the riverfront?
The parking that the total cost of the parking that we show, 7,000 spaces. Important to remember, we only have 5,000 spaces down there now. We're going to get 2,000 more, or 3 new Fountain Square garages. But to get 7,200 spaces, we're projecting a cost of $75,400,000. We think a little over $60 million of that will be paid for by the customers themselves who use the parking. It is because we pulled it so much further north. The occupancy percentages are much higher. The rates are a little higher. You have more utility. On the other hand, We have rates, right now there are only two flavors of parking on the riverfront, $35 for surface lots and $45 for structured parking. We now, in our plan, have rates from $25 to $80 so that everyone can basically find a spot that they can afford in the convenience that they want to have.
I have to tell you that I was in a meeting yesterday with Andy Udras from the city,
Right.
and he argued that that sort of increase in parking rates, taking some spaces up to $80, it just meant people wouldn't park there.
Well, actually, the county, which is going to build this parking consultant, agrees with that. And actually, people think we've been too conservative. On 3rd Street today, 346 feet north of where the northernmost garage is, the average rate is probably $100 a month. And some rates are up to $125 a month. And we're talking rates 5 years from now, okay? So the idea that at $80 a month we're going to be charging too much money is just, we think, untrue. And the point is, at $35 and $40 a month, which is where the current parking is today, some people pay too much and some people pay too little. Some people would like to pay more if they could be closer. What we've been able to do is spread out and band those rates, again, so everyone gets the parking they want.
And I think it's realistic. If you've lived in other cities, you know that we have an incredibly cheap parking situation here compared to a New York or a Boston or anything.
And our other rates, you know, we have rates for Reds fans who aren't season ticket holders who just want to park somewhere on the riverfront. Our rates in structured parking garages are $2.50 to $5 a game. Right now at Synergy Field, they're charging $6 a game. Our rates in our plan for visitors are 3 hours for $1. The city's plan is 2 hours for $2.
So your point is that you feel you can, through the income that people pay, you can retire the bonds that would need to be floated, and that 60 million of this would be able to be paid for.
It will still lose money and require a subsidy, but all parking loses money. And governments decide to pay for it because they want the visitors and the taxes that come with it.
I have one last question. We're almost out of time. Your drawing shows baseball on Main. Does it have to be there, or can your parking still work if it's at a renovated Synergy Field?
It can. It can, and when Fort Washington Way is moved to the north, I think everyone will agree that the wisest use of the land is to put baseball exactly where Michael Schuster put it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This has been very precise, and I really appreciate your answers.
Thank you.
Okay. Stay tuned. In the closing months of 1997, we heard about a financial crisis in Silverton. For years, Central State University has been plagued with financial scandals. After the break, you will meet the state official responsible for helping local government units like these avoid, and if necessary, dig out of financial messes. Welcome back. Those of you who watch Newsmakers on a regular basis know that one of my goals is to pay more attention to the workings of state government. Too often, those of us in Southwest Ohio pretend Columbus doesn't exist, except when we want funding for stadiums or road projects. 2 weeks ago, I sat down with the Auditor of the State of Ohio, Republican Jim Petro, to talk about his overall responsibilities, as well as 3 specific areas of concern: the city of Silverton, Central State University, and the efficiency of Ohio's urban schools. Jim, people in Cincinnati don't pay a lot of attention to state politics and what's going on in Columbus. Just as a starting point, what the heck is the state auditor's office?
And I'm glad you've asked that, because so often citizens who are even government activists aren't really sure, and they may not have learned about the scope of the auditor's office here in Ohio, because in Ohio it's unique. While every state has an auditor, in only 19 states of our 50 do they elect a state auditor, but only in Ohio does the Auditor of State have financial oversight responsibilities over every unit of government. It's a unique constitutional position. It's been part of Ohio's government since Ohio was created. It was given even broader authority when they amended the Constitution in the mid-1800s, and so we are very unique. As the Auditor of State, I've got the largest public audit agency in the United States at the state level. We are actually the 12th largest accounting firm in the country, because we are a whole corps of professionals, principally accountants, over 800 accountants who provide financial oversight, financial auditing, compliance reviews, and more recently, performance assessments of units of government, whether it be villages, townships, counties, cities. It's a fascinating job. I've really enjoyed every element of it, and I think it's one area of government where we can really make a difference in the quality and the efficiency and the operating effectiveness of local governments all over Ohio, which we try to do.
Locally, over the past couple of months, a situation has developed here in the greater Cincinnati area in the city of Silverton, where they've run into some real problems. What's your role in that situation?
We obviously audit the financial records of the city. A city the size of Silverton's most likely every 2 years. Our basic statutory requirement is that we perform a financial audit every 2 years. In Silverton, we've been aware and have been working with the city through our local government services unit of the need they were having cash flow problems as much as anything else. When the problems began to become more acute, we went in and did an analysis and determined that the city was in fiscal watch. That's a condition by law, and it's a declaration that I make that entitles the city to some additional support and services paid for by the state. And it's kind of a category where we get involved with the city, we help them operationally, we provide whatever service they want. But in this case, we took it a step further, and I arranged that our office is currently doing, and we just finished the field work yesterday, a performance audit of the city government. So we'll be poised in the next 2 weeks as we finish that report to issue a series of conclusions and recommendations to the city that I think is going to have a real impact on their operational opportunities, ways that they can become more efficient in their operations.
Should there have been something in place in Silverton to have prevented that from happening?
As a community becomes a non-growth area where it doesn't have growing revenues, the revenues become somewhat stagnant, but operations stay pretty much static. Staff expenses do increase because of salary increases and things like that. You'll see problems evolve in the communities. You call them perhaps the inner ring suburbs. Sometimes the urban communities have difficulty. In those instances, there really has to be a proactive approach on the part of that city to reduce their operating expenses, to examine their operations on a regular basis and try to find ways to make them more efficient. The one thing that is the most frustrating in this job is when I sit down with governmental officials and they basically are perfectly happy with the status quo. It is my view, and I express this often to financial managers and public officials, don't be happy with the way it is today. I don't care how good you think it is. You can, through good operating efficiencies, through real management opportunities, make your operations better.
Another area that has been a problem for the state of Ohio that people have become aware of is the situation at Central State University. What's your office's involvement in that problem?
The trustees of that university, the people who at the time were the real responsible organization, they knew this. Audit reports under my predecessor, for years, the information that came to them from the state auditor's office was, these are very much operational weaknesses. These are areas where you have a lack of controls. You need to make these changes, and the changes were never made.
At the request of the state legislature, the state auditor's office has been asked to take on this whole new area, performance audits for the urban school district. What's involved there?
The legislature in 1995, and I was in my first 6 months in office, and I was a bit surprised when I saw this come out of the state budget bill, but they said specifically that the Auditor of State will perform a comprehensive performance audit of the Cleveland Public Schools. We did that because the legislature told us to do it. We did it very thoroughly, very promptly, came out with a 600-page report. Many of the recommendations, probably half of them, have already been adopted over the last several years. And I think it was not only a good work product, it made a lot of good common sense with a lot of very practical recommendations. Following that, the City of Youngstown School Board asked us to come in and do something similar, which we then did. And I think there again, we made a lot of very good recommendations that can improve the operating efficiency of that school system. In the midst of all of this, the legislature began to say, well, the auditor's office is pretty good at this, and we want to utilize them more regularly. So they proposed that we would audit on a performance basis, in addition to our financial auditing, the 21 largest school districts in Ohio. And we do that over a 2-year period. That has begun. We're just completing the reports for Hamilton schools up here in Butler County, Springfield schools, Lorain and Elyria schools. Those are the first 4 we've done as part of this series. This month we will start doing a performance audit at Cincinnati schools, at Columbus schools, Toledo and Akron. And this process of doing 4 every 4 to 5 to 6 months, depending on the size of the district, will continue.
Now, the Cleveland situation was a very special situation. They're in a severe state of economic disaster. You went a long way in that situation.
And when we go into Hamilton, we compare Hamilton with other similarly sized districts. We'll do the same with Cincinnati. What is their ratio of employees per pupil? What is their ratio of square footage of instructional space per pupil? Are they overbuilt? Do they have too much capital facilities? What is their ratio in terms of their maintenance cost, in terms of square footage of instructional buildings? How many administrative staff do they have as compared to their pupils? They could be overstaffed administratively. We've seen that at some districts where they're frankly top-heavy.
In a district like Cincinnati, which isn't under severe economic strain, what sort of expectations do you have about what this audit will involve?
As you look at the per pupil spending levels in the urban districts and how that might compare with other districts, for the first time now, as we develop benchmarks and we really do cost analysis, there really is an opportunity to make those kind of comparisons. And I think it's going to make the budgeting process and the operating changes that will have to occur in the years to come much more easy to bring about because of the information we're able to generate.
You talk about creating benchmarks. One of the worries that some people have locally, like in the Lakota School District during the last election, is that the state's getting itself in a position to actually dictate to local school districts exactly how to spend money, how many employees to have, how many teachers to have. Is that what this urban auditing situation is really all about?
But in terms of state control, I don't necessarily believe that we should move away from the local control we've talked about, but there are certain things that are established as state statutory standards that are probably worthwhile. One of the things that has happened with these performance audits is the state appropriated $110 million for the 21 urban school districts on what they called an urban schools grant. The reason they put the performance audits in place for our office to perform them is that if a district then doesn't develop a strategy to improve their efficiency consistent with our recommendations, doesn't have to be exactly what we recommend, but get the ball moving to be more efficient. If they don't do that, they could forfeit. They could lose their state urban grant dollars. That's probably not a bad state incentive because the state does provide a lot of financial resources for local schools.
Everything you've described emphasizes how important it is that the auditor's office be independent. Now, here in Hamilton County, which is Republican dominated, we have a local auditor, Dusty Rhodes, who happens to be a Democrat, and that sort of increases his sense or identity of independence. Can your office really be independent?
We are absolutely independent, and the first rule that I put in place is that we will be independent. I personally, as much as I might have friends that are in public office, I don't campaign for or contribute my time or my name to any candidate for offices that we audit. We've had a lot of findings. We've made a lot of conclusions on public fund abuses all over Ohio, and I would guess that from a partisan standpoint, it's about equal, Republicans and Democrats.
Final question. One of the many commissions that you sit on is the State Sinking Fund Commission. Now, that's a great name. What the heck is the sinking fund, and do you end up with a sinking feeling from the sinking fund?
Sinking fund is money appropriated to cover debt service. And so I am the president of the commissioners of the Sinking Fund of Ohio. And the Sinking Fund of Ohio really only administers the constitutional debt of Ohio and authorizes certain other constitutionally approved debt authorizations, some highway debt, some other constitutionally approved programs.
Thank you for being with us this morning. Join us again next Sunday.